Now we have to get back into the news and think about dead elephants. Just less pleasant. That's not as nice. But in any case, President Trump is walking back his administration's decision to end a 3-year-old Obama-era regulation banning big game hunting trophies from Africa after a bunch of people who don't know anything about big game hunting or conservation complained on Twitter. Even Republicans, even conservatives are getting in on this because people don't seem to understand the rationale behind big game hunting and trophies. Here, Uncle Jimbo explains.
Now, we only kill animals to, quote, thin out their numbers. If we don't hunt, then these animals will grow too big a number and they won't have enough food. So you see, we have to kill animals or else they'll die.
There it is. It's simple enough. We have to kill the animals or else they will die. That's very, very simple. And, you know, it's comedic, right? It's so counterintuitive that hunting the animals will actually increase their numbers and lead to more conservation. But just because you don't understand something doesn't mean it isn't true. Shallows are clear, right? And so The Atlantic summed up stupid coverage of this weekend. They wrote, quote, "If you were an elephant, you might be puzzling over human behavior this week." Well, I'm not an elephant. Also, elephants don't puzzle, you know, because they're animals. But but this is how they think, right? If I were the animal, if animals were like people, they go further. They say, if elephants are recognized as legal persons, a term the U.S. courts have granted to corporations, well, and New Zealand has given to a river and it's been extended to yada, 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 it would be more difficult to hunt them at all, let alone import their body parts. Right, so it is true. Let me try to explain this to The Atlantic, how an elephant might not be a person, but corporations are people. Corporations are groups of people. They're not groups of animals. They're not buildings. They're not newspapers. They're groups of people working in corporation with one another. And you don't surrender your rights, your constitutional rights, just because you work with other people. That's why, famously, Mitt Romney, he was pilloried for this, but it nevertheless is the case. Corporations are people. What else are they? They aren't gates. They aren't unicorns. They aren't buildings. They're people. They're groups of people working together. Now, here's a statistic. 30,000 elephants a year are killed by poachers. When we're talking about big game hunting and giving out licenses, we're talking about a handful of these things per year. We're not talking about the 30,000 that are killed because their tusks are so valuable that starving people in Africa who want to make a profit decide to kill them, and they sell an ounce of it and they make a year's salary. According to a 2005 paper in the Journal of International Wildlife Law, legalization of white rhinoceros hunting in South Africa motivated private landowners to reintroduce the species onto their lands. So we're not just talking about preserves that are held by the public or held by the government or whatever. We're talking about incentives. So when this became legal, landowners realized, oh, interesting, if we bring some of those things on here that are worth a ton of money and we allow people to hunt for them, then we will make money too. As a result, there was an increase in white rhinos from fewer than 100 individual rhinos to more than 11,000, even while only a limited number were killed as trophies. Well, how does this work? It's because conservation is expensive. So you remember this, a couple years ago in May 2015, a Texan legally shot a critically endangered black rhino in Namibia. So there's this species of black rhino, they're critically endangered. This guy goes over there and shoots one. He bought a license for $350,000. That was money generated from the hunt. It was a totally managed hunt. That money was reinvested in conservation, maintaining habitats, maintaining environments, keeping people around to stop the poachers. And the key here isn't even the money per se. Obviously in Namibia, $350,000 goes a long way, goes farther than it does in Los Angeles or New York. But that isn't it. It's about the system of incentives. Just like, you know, capitalism as we describe it. And I don't even like to use that term. It's a term that was invented by socialists to pillory free markets. But freedom, economic freedom, free markets protected by the rule of law and people making sure there's a level playing field. It's not just about all of the wealth it produces, though it does. The reason it produces that wealth is because all of the incentives are aligned. So if we're just talking about conservation and only basing it on altruism, there's a limit to human altruism. But there isn't a limit to humans looking after their own interests and hopefully hopefully producing good along the way, meaning property, meaning prosperity, meaning jobs for people, meaning wealth to invest in the environment. We'll talk about this a little bit more on Thursday when we get to Thanksgiving, but the Pilgrims learned this lesson very hard after a couple of years. Incentives are important here. So, for instance, when this big game hunting is illegal, when trophies can be taken home, then there's more of an incentive to have wild land and less farmland. So it keeps the wild wild. Why is this? Well, if landowners can make more money, either the government or private landowners can make more money from selling licenses and letting people hunt these beautiful animals than they can from farming, then they're going to do that, right? But if they start farming, then they're going to cut down all of the grazing habitats anyway. So controlled, legalized hunting has also been beneficial for Zimbabwe's elephants. Now, this is the big issue. People love elephants. I love elephants. It's the symbol of my dear political party. I wear elephant designs and things like that for just that reason. There are those weird videos of elephants painting that are very terrifying. You know, they exhibit some intelligence. So they say, well, if we allow these trophies, then the elephants are going to be endangered and all of their tusks are going to be taken and sold for the ivory. But trophy hunting has doubled the area of that country under wildlife management relative to the 13% in state-protected areas. Why is that? Because there's an incentive for wild areas to remain wild. As a result, the area of suitable land available to elephants and other wildlife has increased. And by the way, we're not talking about post-hunt sales. So we're not saying, well, there will be more and there will be a freer market in trading in these things, so poachers are just going to go out and get them and sell them. First of all, they're already doing that. Poaching is the problem. These big game hunters are statistically insignificant when we're talking about big game, elephants, rhinoceroses being killed. But we're not even talking about post-hunt sales. We're talking about trophies. So you have to hunt it, you have to get it, you have to bring it home. You can't buy it from a poacher. It doesn't change that market whatsoever. Now, talking just about rhinos, 2 rhinos per day were killed in Africa in 2012. Well over 700 rhinos. South Africa alone, 461 rhinos were killed in just the first half of 2013. South Africa is a major area for this. So we know that that's the problem. The problem isn't Eric Trump going and hunting, or some dentist from America, or a guy who purchases a very expensive permit to go to conservation efforts. It's difficult for lefties to consider these things beyond the graphic. Even some conservatives have fallen into this. I saw a lot of famous right-wing celebrities. I won't name them because they're allies and they're usually right, but they were wrong about this, saying this is awful. Donald Trump, you have to get rid of this. This is so terrible. But, shallows are clear, folks. Very often, you see the picture, you see the poor little rhinoceros or the animals or the cheetahs, and you say, we shouldn't do that. But your gut emotional visceral reaction is not necessarily the way to protect these animals. It isn't enough to say, not that one. Oh, look, we saved Cecil. Isn't that okay? Don't worry, everything's fine now. Cecil isn't the issue. The issue is 30,000 animals being killed every year. The issue is, or poachers, because these trophies have value to them. And the challenge is to stop being emotional, to stop saying, well, as long as we don't see any more pictures, that's all well and good. You have to think beyond the pictures and think about creating incentives and systems that will actually protect those animals. So as a result, I hope that President Trump thinks about this thoughtfully and doesn't simply listen to all of the people on Twitter, because people on Twitter very often don't know a thing.